Hosea chapter 2. In verse 14 it says this: "Therefore I am going to allure her, I will lead her into the desert and speak tenderly to her. There I will give her back her vineyards, and will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. There she will sing as in the days of her youth, as in the days she came out of Egypt. In that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband, you will no longer call me my master." The plan of God is to bring the reconciliation of God's people to himself. And this chapter in Hosea focuses on the way in which God is seeking to draw Israel back to himself. And Hosea is a prophet who knows the pain of broken relationship. And so God talks about the way in which coming from the desert place, it brings a dependence, it brings a way in which Israel will realize her great need of encountering God, a great need of meeting with God. And the tenderness of God sometimes comes in places when we are in a dry place, when we're in a difficult place, when other props, other supports have gone away and we're left there alone. And sometimes that's the best place for us to be. Sometimes that's the place where we suddenly realise our great need, our need of closeness, of intimacy with God. And it's at that place that God says, I will bring this fruitfulness back in her life, as Israel as a nation will experience the return of fruitfulness, the vineyards, the blessing of the land. And we sometimes need to work out that blessing isn't always the first thing that comes along the track. Sometimes intimacy with God is far more important than blessing. Blessing in the outward ways is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be a diversion, a distraction. It can be almost the thing that keeps us away from that closeness with God, if it becomes the only thing that our focus relies on. Because God is jealous for us. There's a godly jealousy, which is the same jealousy that a husband has, a godly jealousy for his wife. That there's an exclusiveness, a desire that there won't be other gods for Israel, a desire that God alone would be the one that Israel is worshipping, is focused on, is devoted to. And Hosea talks so much about that cheap love, that sort of cheap and nasty devotion that Israel had towards other gods, that left them unsatisfied, unfulfilled, left them empty. And God is saying, I want you to return back to me. And the valley of Achor means trouble, becomes a door of hope. Even the circumstances of adversity become a door of opportunity for God to come in, to return to that youthful love, return to that first love that Jesus talks to the church in Ephesus in the book of Revelation, that you've lost your first love. You've done all these things, you've gone through the motions, you've kind of done the duties even, but losing the first love, you've lost the focus. And it's clear with Israel too that they may have carried on certain practices, they may have carried on certain ceremonies, but it was mixed with all this other stuff, and the ceremonies that they carried on were empty and pointless really, because there was no devotion to God. If their real heart was one in another direction, if their hearts were not in it, it was just a meaningless exercise. And so the natural call of Israel is to be returned to God. The natural word on her lips was worship. The natural heart inclination was towards her husband, the God of Israel. And so God calls us back to himself. He calls us back out of the desert place, out of the place of barrenness sometimes that we've ended up in as a result of our choices, as a result of the things that we have put as number one. He calls us back to himself. He calls us back to a youthful relationship. So I want to pray that we would experience that afresh today, that we would experience that renewal of faith, we would experience that renewal of hope, the renewal of our first love, a renewal of returning to him wherever we've been in a dry place, wherever we've felt a distance. We all have those experiences at times. So I want to pray that we would be called back by the tenderness of God, called back into that closeness, into that intimate relationship again, that we would rediscover him as the number one, rediscover him as the one in which we need the intimate relationship with.